Sometimes a deadly threat does not arise where one looks for it. Not in criminal reports, not in emergencies, but in everyday decisions, haste, overconfidence, and incorrect risk assessment. In this video, we have collected 8 cases in which ordinary people lost their lives because of their own mistakes, a desire to save time, or the belief that it will never happen to me. Each story is an example of how a simple action can turn into a fatal choice, and a moment of carelessness can be the last one in your life. In the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, the winter of 2015 was particularly cold. Dennis Riley, 46, a local self-taught electrician, had always prided himself on being able to fix anything in his own home. His garage had been turned into a kind of workshop, with tools lining the shelves and diagrams and homemade blueprints hanging on the walls. On the evening of January 12th, he took a new gasoline generator out of the box, a purchase he made after several power outages in the neighborhood. Dennis decided to test it immediately to make sure it worked stably and could power a minimum of household appliances in case of an accident. Neighbors saw him entering the garage, closing the metal gate behind him to keep the heat inside. Meanwhile, in the house, his wife was preparing dinner and was sure that her husband would be back in a few minutes. Inside the garage, Dennis hooked up the fuel, unscrewed the air filter cap, and listened. He had always been suspicious of factory settings, so he decided he had to check it out for himself. When he started the engine, he heard a slight shudder and assumed that the engine was not running smoothly. Eager to understand the cause, he sat down next to it and put his face close to the exhaust port, trying to determine the smell and temperature of the gases. Dennis had done this before with smaller devices, lawn mowers, walk-behind tractors, old generators, but always in open spaces. This time, he decided that just a minute of testing would not pose a threat. The garage was completely closed. The ventilation was almost non-existent. Dennis had turned off the old exhaust fan long ago, planning to replace it when he had time. The motor ran smoothly, evenly releasing a stream of carbon monoxide, which quickly began to accumulate in a small space. After 2 minutes, the CO concentration reached a level where consciousness begins to fade. Dennis felt a little dizzy, but attributed it to fatigue after a long day at work. He leaned in closer, checking the sound of the exhaust, and at that moment, the first wave of toxic exposure paralyzed his ability to think critically. He sat down on a stool next to the generator, tried to stand up, and couldn't. The oxygen in his blood was already rapidly decreasing. A few seconds later, Dennis fainted, leaning his shoulder against the wall. The generator continued to work for more than an hour, filling the room with a lethal concentration of gas. The wife, noticing that her husband was not returning, approached the garage only when the smell of gasoline made its way to the corridor. When she opened the door, thick carbon monoxide hit her in the face. Dennis was lying against the wall, and it was obvious that help was too late. The rescuers who arrived only pronounced him dead. Carbon monoxide poisoning had set in quickly and without any chance of rescue. For the family, it was a devastating tragedy, and for the local fire department, it was another example of how people's confidence in their own experience can play a fatal role. The generator never left the test mode. It was in good working order. The only dangerous thing was the decision to run it in a confined space. Dennis had worked with technology all his life, but this habit of better check it yourself was his last. In the spring of 2021, Utah's hiking trails were flooded with travelers after long-lasting quarantine restrictions. Trevor Wells, 28, came here with his friends to finally shoot some normal content, as he put it. He worked as a technician in a repair company and traveled infrequently, but always tried to take vivid photos from any trip. This time, his plan was simple. Take a short route along the canyon, shoot a few shots for social media, and return to the campsite before sunset. The road to the viewpoint was easy, and the group joked about how tourists play it safe near the edges. As they approached the fence, Trevor was the first to notice that the metal sections seemed a little flimsy. His friends brushed him off, but he decided to prove that the railing was just a formality and that it would withstand any load. On camera, he said a phrase that would later become ominous. "Look, even if you pile on them, nothing will happen." Trevor leaned on the structure with his forearms, checking the deflection of the metal. The fence did indeed sway, but it went back up, and this only gave him more confidence. Then, laughing, he decided to take the last shot, in which he seemed to be falling backwards, but was being held by the railing. His friends were standing nearby and, according to them, thought for a moment that it was dangerous. But before they could say anything, Trevor had already shifted his body weight forward, completely resting his chest on the metal bar. At that moment, the fence gave way. The bottom bolts that held it to the stone base were so rusted that they were actually holding on to thin remnants of metal. When Trevor piled on with all his weight, the structure broke up and forward, opening a void between him and the canyon. His friends only saw him take a step back, trying to keep his balance, but the stone ledge under his feet was too narrow. He disappeared from the edge in just a second. They didn't hear the sound of impact. The wind in the canyon took him away. One of the guys rushed to the edge, but the depth was more than 60 meters, and the canyon walls were almost vertical. It took several minutes to call rescuers, but everyone realized that there was no chance of survival. The park's team found Trevor's body on a stone terrace below, where it was impossible to get to without special equipment. Forensic experts later determined that he died instantly from multiple fall injuries. After the tragedy, inspectors discovered that the fence had long been in need of repair. The supports were damaged by corrosion, and some of the fasteners were loose due to severe temperature changes. Even so, the fence would not have collapsed without an external intentional load. Trevor wasn't jumping or trying to do anything desperate. He just wanted a fun shot. His friends couldn't recover for a long time, repeating the same thing. Everything happened too fast for anyone to intervene. The trip, which was supposed to be a vacation and an opportunity for new photos, ended in a tragedy in which one mistake, overestimating the strength of the metal structure, became fatal. Recommendations were received from the local authorities to upgrade and strengthen the infrastructure, but this could not change the event that took the life of a young man. The November morning in 2017 in central Alabama was calm and cold. George Whitmore, 55, had returned from hunting earlier than he had planned. There was no game to be seen, and the wind was getting stronger. He walked into his shed, a small room with tools, hunting gear, and a few old guns hanging on hooks that he was repairing for neighbors. George had always been confident with guns, sometimes too much so. He was convinced that he knew their behavior better than the instructions. When he noticed that one of the shells in the barrel of his pump-action shotgun was stuck, he decided to clear it right away. He put the weapon on his knees, took out a metal pin, and began to knock the cartridge case out of the barrel without checking to make sure the gun was fully unloaded. He had done this action dozens of times in his life, each time without consequences. It was this habit that was dangerous. There was a cartridge inside, which he had not noticed in the semi-darkness of the shed. When the pin hit the capsule, a micro-explosion occurred, and the bolt went forward. It happened instantly. The sound was short, pointed, and without echo. The barrel, aimed directly at his face, worked with deadly accuracy. A neighbor who heard the pop thought George had just fired in the air while checking his other gear. But when he went into the shed a few minutes later, George was already lying motionless near the chair he had been sitting on. The medics who arrived could only pronounce him dead. The story was discussed for a long time among the hunters in the area. Everyone knew that George was not a lightweight, but he was too confident in his experience. Unloading a weapon before cleaning it was a rule he repeated to others, but he broke only once, and that was enough to make this habitual, everyday action his last. The Florida morning of 2020 was quiet, humid, and warm. The night's rain had not yet dried on the soil outside 42-year-old Frank Dillon's home. He worked as a mechanic in a small workshop. but he preferred to repair most of the minor problems in his pickup truck himself. The truck was a necessity for him. He used it to go fishing, to work, and to go shopping. So when one of the rear wheels started to go flat, Frank decided to replace it right away to avoid spending extra money on service. He thought it was a simple, routine procedure. In his experience, such little things were almost routine. The problem was that the pickup was not on concrete, but on wet sand near the driveway. The rain the day before had softened the ground, but Frank didn't care. He placed the jack under the frame of the pickup, checked the position, made sure the metal was lying flat, and began to slowly lift the truck. At first, everything was stable. The pickup lifted smoothly, and Frank even checked with his hand to see if there was enough space under the truck to unscrew the nuts. The problem was that the sand was gradually being pushed under the weight of the car, but this process was almost imperceptible. The jack was slowly sinking into the ground, changing the angle of the load. Frank didn't see it. He was focused on the wheel and groping for the wrench to loosen the bolts. For a moment, the car stood still, and Frank, believing that everything was securely fixed, put his shoulders under the wheel arch to get to the bottom bolt more easily. At this point, the sand under the jack shifted a few centimeters, but it was enough to cause the metal rod to move to the side. The weight of the pickup tipped the structure over in a split second. The car rolled off the jack and fell down. A neighbor, who was walking his dog, heard a dull sound like a heavy object falling. He ran over only a minute later and saw the pickup standing unevenly, with Frank's arm blocked under the back. Rescuers arrived quickly, but it was impossible to lift the vehicle manually, and the time it took to set up the lifting equipment was crucial. Frank died instantly from chest injuries and organ compression. Colleagues in the workshop recalled that he always emphasized safety, but this time his haste and habit of doing things on automatic played against him. His tools remained laid out next to the machine, as if he had just taken a short break. This incident was another reminder that even experienced people can make mistakes when they ignore a simple rule: never work under a car without reliable support and a solid surface. March 2018 was unusually warm in Minnesota. Daytime temperatures had been above freezing for almost a week, and most local fishermen had given up on going out on the ice, knowing that spring thaw made it unpredictable. But 51-year-old Henry Coleman considered himself an experienced man. Over almost 30 years of winter travel, he had learned to determine the condition of the ice by ear and sincerely trusted his own feelings more than official recommendations. In the morning of that day, he arrived at the familiar bay where he usually fished for perch. There was still snow on the surface, but underneath was wet, grainy ice, the kind that loses its strength suddenly. Henry tapped the ice pick and, satisfied with the sound, moved forward. He was alone, without a partner, and he didn't even bring a vest or a rope. Everything seemed superfluous to him because the place was checked. He had walked about 10 meters from the shore when he heard a crack, almost inaudible against the wind. Henry stopped, bent down to assess the color of the ice, but at that moment, a crack formed under him. It widened so rapidly that he did not have time to take a single step back. The ice under his feet parted and collapsed, plunging him into the icy water. The water temperature was so low that the cold shock was instantaneous. Henry tried to grab the edge, but the grainy spring ice broke under his fingers, falling apart into lumps. His clothes quickly got wet and heavy, and his movements slowed down. In the first minutes, he called for help, but there was no one around. According to the rescuers' estimates, Henry stayed in the water for no more than 5 minutes. After that, his body stopped responding. His body was found by the Lake Patrol services, who were called by tourists who noticed things left on the shore. The official report confirmed that the ice was only 3 to 4 centimeters thick and was completely unsuitable for movement. Henry's friends knew him as a cautious but stubborn fisherman who believed in his own experience more than in changing weather conditions. His death was yet another tragic example of how spring ice is unforgiving of overconfidence, and how a gut feeling check is not a safety tool that can replace real caution. On the outskirts of a small town in Nevada, Louis Burton's salon stood out with a bright neon sign that he had installed himself. In May 2016, one of the light modules started flickering, and Louis, 39, decided to fix it himself, without waiting for an electrician or spending money on minor repairs. The job seemed elementary: remove the plastic cover, tighten the contact, and return to the customers. The only problem was that the sign was hanging over a narrow sidewalk, which was immediately followed by a slow-moving traffic lane. He had a ladder in the back room, but, as he told his colleague, it would take a lot of time to get it out, set it up, and waste time. Instead, he brought out an ordinary plastic kitchen chair, light and comfortable, but not at all suited for working at height. Luis placed it as close to the wall as he could, not noticing that one leg was on the edge of the sidewalk, where the concrete had a slight slope. When he stood up, the chair was already wobbling a bit, but he didn't feel it or simply ignored it. He was holding the edge of the sign with one hand, trying to unscrew the fixing screw with the other, and as soon as he reached forward to remove the plastic panel, the center of gravity shifted. The plastic structure, designed to withstand a uniform load, bent and cracked sharply. Luis lost his footing and fell forward onto the road as an old truck started to move after the traffic light. The driver was driving slowly and slowed down almost immediately, but the car had already hit the man's body, causing fatal chest injuries. Paramedics who arrived a few minutes later pronounced him dead on the spot. Colleagues stood at the entrance to the salon, shocked at how a simple action that Luis had taken without any fear had turned into a fatal mistake. The investigation confirmed that there were no malfunctions in the sign or external factors, only the wrong choice of support and location above the roadway. After the tragedy, the city even introduced brief safety guidelines for small business owners, reminding them that quick fixes are often the most dangerous and that even an experienced person can pay with their life for ignoring basic rules. In July 2022, on the outskirts of Chicago, 30-year-old Thomas Pearson decided to prove to his friends that he could create a modern and completely safe fireworks ignition system. He had been fascinated by electronics since high school and often assembled homemade devices, but had never tested them on high charges. This time, he embarked on a project that combined a cheap Bluetooth module, a battery, and a thin nichrome wire that would heat up after a signal from a smartphone. Thomas wanted to make a video for social media. He planned to demonstrate how, from a few meters away, you could control a fireworks display with the touch of a button. The problem was that the entire circuit was assembled on a breadboard without protection against short circuits or impulse oscillations. In addition, he connected the wire directly to the ignition channel of a large fireworks charge, bought at a discount store and not intended for any modifications. In the evening, Thomas took the equipment to the yard behind the house. He turned on the Bluetooth module, placed his phone on the edge of the table, and leaned over the firework case to check that the wire was properly attached. According to the neighbors, he was fixing something very carefully, as if the wiring mattered as much as the charge itself. At that moment, the module received a short pulse, possibly due to a firmware error or accidental reconnection with the smartphone. The wire heated up in a split second, and the charge worked instantly. No one saw exactly what happened at that moment, but the neighbors heard a sharp pop and saw a column of sparks over the yard. Thomas was thrown back and fell next to the table, showing no signs of life. Paramedics called by neighbors could only pronounce him dead. The investigation revealed that the ignition tube had been activated prematurely, and the homemade device did not have any of the safety features used in professional pyrotechnic systems. Thomas's friends, who knew him as an enthusiastic but short-tempered person, could not understand for a long time why he decided to test the device in such a position, leaning directly over the charge. For the investigators, the reason was obvious: confidence in his own knowledge and lack of basic safety measures. He did not plan to take any risks. He wanted to showcase the innovation, make a bright shot, and prove that he understood the technology. But one command sent to the module at the wrong time was fatal. Colleagues from the university's electronics club later said that Thomas always sought to improve things that already work. That evening, he received confirmation that some devices do not tolerate experimentation, and fireworks even less so. In Denver in 2019, 34-year-old tech specialist Neil Stanford became fascinated with the idea of optimizing heart function through pacing. He read scientific forums, watched experiments by enthusiasts, and decided to create his own device that would send short electrical signals to the pectoral muscles, supposedly speeding up metabolism and improving endurance. Neil was convinced that he could replicate the principles of medical equipment at home, even though he had no medical training or certified components. He assembled a small module based on a voltage converter, added a pulse strength regulator, and attached homemade electrodes made of copper plates and gel pads. To control the effect in real time, he decided to use a fitness tracker at the same time, monitoring changes in heart rate and heart rate variability. He set it all up right in his apartment, sitting at a table with tools, wires, and power supplies lying around. Neil made sure that the electrode resistance was sufficient, but he did not take into account that the gel pads greatly reduced the overall skin resistance, allowing much more current to flow than he had expected. When he turned on the device and moved the control to the maximum position, the module delivered a sharp electrical pulse, much stronger than what is allowed for contact with the chest area. At first, Neil took a sharp breath and tried to disconnect the electrodes, but the second pulse caused chaotic contractions of the heart muscle. The fitness tracker recorded a brief spike in heart rate, followed by a sharp drop, data that investigators later recovered. The man fell off his chair, trying to turn off the device, but the convulsions prevented him from even reaching the power cord. A minute later, his heart went into fibrillation, and he lost consciousness. He was alone in the apartment, and no one heard the noise. It was only the next day that a colleague, surprised by his absence from work, came to check on him. He found Neil at his desk, and next to him, the module was still on, continuing to deliver weak pulses to the disconnected electrodes. The forensic examination established the cause of death as electrical dysfunction of the heart, caused by uncontrolled pulsed current. Neil's friends recalled that he often talked about personal experiments, but never admitted how far he went in his research. His death was a reminder that medical technologies are not created by accident or for amateur repetition, and the heart is not an organ that can be experimented with without consequences. The 8 stories you heard have one thing in common: underestimation of risk. In each case, people were confident that they were in control of the situation, and it was this confidence that proved fatal. Such tragedies do not occur suddenly, but in small decisions that seem mundane and safe. These cases remind us that the line between habitual actions and irreversible consequences is much thinner than it seems. If you are interested in such analyses, please subscribe to the channel and like it. It helps us create new episodes. Thank you for watching.